Hey guys, Alex Williamson here talking about the economic and political issues associated with guppies. So, this is talking about current day. I talked a little bit about the colonial nature of kind of when British and Scottish and Dutch, French, German, you name it, Belgium, Danish, all those sorts of people went out and they categorized everything in the world that was living basically as to put a little flag, like the kind you find on a cupcake. They just put a little flag. That's my fish. That's my mosquito. That's my fossil. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the modern state of things and why it is that we're raising these fancy guppies that you see in the tank here. These are some babies and a bluegrass male and female hiding somewhere in there. But why is it that we have these long-finned, more colorful types rather than the silver ones that are in the wild? Why aren't we still getting those as feeder fish and whatnot? It used to be cheaper to import them. So it all goes back to kind of oil, basically. So first, we had this doctrine in the U.S., the McArthy Doctrine, and the idea being under that after World War II that we would want to have a sphere of influence in Central and South America and claim that as ours after World War II, after World War I, that in the 20th century, we needed to have control over the regimes in our hemisphere, in the Western Hemisphere. So, because of this, we then had oil companies and different mining companies, as well as governments kind of put into place in these South American countries. It's constantly been a fight between America and Russia historically, with the communists on one side and supposedly democracy-seeking rebels on the other. Usually they end up being kind of fascist dictators. You can look back at Manuel Noriega, lots of failed coups and lots of successful coups and lots of blood spilt in El Salvador and in Nicaragua and, Peru, Shining Path, which was a communist group. But in Venezuela, what we're talking about, mostly where we're sourcing guppies, and in the Caribbean islands and the Netherlands Antilles Islands, the biggest issue right now is oil and forest reduction. So when you chop down a forest in the Amazon, that forest has been growing for a few million years. The closest guess right now is that it's been about 7 million years, all the way up to 30 million years, that zone on the equator has been a place for, always evolving, but tropical, semi-tropical life forms. And these fish have been evolving for probably millions of years as well. And they've evolved guppies so that they can swim out to sea, and so that they have these endemic, or endemic meaning it only lives on that one island or that one stream, populations all throughout the region of the Caribbean and Trinidad, Tobago, off the coast of Venezuela and Brazil. And one of those rivers, if it gets destroyed, we lose a whole chunk of the population. We lose those genes forever. And because of things going on like logging right now, we are causing the banks of the river, or not we, but the people logging are causing the banks of the river to get muddied and murky. And while guppies like muddy and murky, they don't like water with no oxygen in it. And that's another side effect. Also, they're doing gold mining and things like that, and they dump sulfuric acid and other nasty chemicals into the water. And this has caused a lot of the areas that flood every wet season in the Amazon and the Orinoco Delta to basically fill up and flood anything that is on land, and then carry those chemicals and gasoline that have been dripping out of tractors and bulldozers and chainsaws, and that will float into the water and reduce the population of a lot of these fish. And some of them can take it, but these little fish, even though they're very adaptable and they've survived this long, they simply can't take all of that pressure of the chemicals and things. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, why would a country that used to export these things in the 30s and 40s and had a big economy based on it, why would they want to chop that down? One of it is that wood is more expensive than guppies. But beyond that, the oil trade under Maderas in Venezuela, the state owns the oil rights, and they have decided to basically drill everywhere, trying to give free or near free gasoline and oil to their people as one of the only ways they have to appease them right now. And beyond this, there's been a conflict now. There's an opposition party. There's actually about 6 of them, but one of the opposition parties in particular is a pro-democracy, likely right-wing rebel-leaning group, and they have begun to fight back against the so-called communist, but it's also just a messy dictatorship under Maderas. It used to be Chavez before that, but they've held on to power with a slim margin, taken over state media and control of all sorts of different resources, and redistributed them to disastrous ends, unfortunately, for the people of Venezuela. This has also trickled down to guppies. So if we were to be getting guppies from Venezuela right now, one, we would be saving some of these populations that are probably very near extinction, and that could be a noble task if somebody wants to go down there and try to grab some. But also, you don't want to deplete the fragile places where they are left. And same with endlers, live bearers, and swordfins, and other, platies and things like that give live birth that are from the region, and corridors and tetras and all sorts of things. They've fared a little bit better than the guppies, because the guppies live really in that salty kind of intertidal area that we see a lot of commerce, and we see a lot of building up of houses along those ridges and things on the riverbanks. And with that comes boats and oil, and then also the fish that do survive tend to be the predatory fish that are eating all these dead fish that have been showing up. So just a thing to think about, that we've got these guppies that came from the 1860s, and we're breeding probably 100 generations out lines of these guppies discovered by Robert John Leshmere Guppy, as well as several other people, but he got the name to stick in honor of his description of them. And through that colonialism, we then introduced the colonialism of, a world economy with wood and gold and silver and precious metals and oil. And the oil also has pipelines that they run through these marshlands. And that causes the marshlands to break up and kind of dissolve. And you see the same thing in Louisiana and other areas where breakwaters, sandbars, marshes that once kind of held these intertidal species and critters that lived in freshwater ponds that were maybe rainwater filled, and they raise and lower in height throughout the year. Now these areas are becoming less and less, and we're finding that it's hard to find these wild type guppies, and most of them exist in private collections of people who've been keeping these strains alive since really the 70s, early 80s was kind of the end of when mass amounts were coming. We're still getting neon tetras and things like that out of the area, but more and more the fish trade is shifted over to Thailand and Malaysia, who has a whole different set of problems. But as part of this series, I just wanted to think about, are these fish becoming conflict guppies? If we were to get fish out of there, we'd be probably paying a tariff to the government, and we'd be paying tax stamps and all sorts of things. And are we supporting the thing that is destroying the fish? And is it worth it to pull them out? I would love to go on an expedition down there and to catch a lot of wild types and, get them in the hands of people who wanted to raise them and keep them wild with those strong genes. But just a thought, and just trying to tie in this series, like the world implications of these little fish that happen to be in your fish tank that maybe you don't give that much thought to. Maybe, it just seems like a simple fish, but it's come a long way to get to you and to have the genes that it has and to to look the way it does, and it's been weakened by interbreeding and things like that make it look good. So it's kind of a conundrum. What do we do? Do we go back and we start harvesting what's left in order to save it, or is that kind of an arrogant Western view of things? And what lives lives. There's a lot of different takes on it, but what's clear is that their habitat is shrinking, and that the guppies we have now don't resemble the wild ones so much. And in fact, the feeder guppies are the closest thing you're going to get to wild types. And it's just kind of something to consider when you buy a fish. If you buy something from the Congo, for instance, same place as conflict minerals, where you're paying warlords and these other groups who are depleting the natural habitat, as well as the state that's depleting the natural habitat, and you're buying these fish in mass from them that are already, oftentimes on the brink of extinction. So it's just something to think about. Just a little bit of a walk through the world of what's going on right now in the natural habitat of guppies. Hopefully, habitat restoration and just time. Maybe there's some pockets that will re-inhabit the area. I'm sure this is not the first major thing that they have faced for the species and subspecies of guppies as far as being a threat to them, but it's definitely probably the biggest one in any time we can think about recently, short of maybe some volcanic or glacial period interference. But so I just want you to think about the Venezuelan conflict guppy, as it were, and if we can get our hands on it. Message me what you think about this. If there's any other fish that are coming out of conflict zones or that originated there, and just kind of the change that has taken place to their habitat, and the fact that as fish keepers, we're keeping alive, even if not in the wild type, we're keeping alive this fish and the genetics, and we're perpetuating that. And it's a really cool thing to be able to do, and to think about that you have this global impact. Maybe we'll re-release and kind of devolve and let them go feral back into this region in 20 or 30 years. I don't know. So comment below if there's other regions you'd like to talk about. I'm thinking about talking about Malaysia next, and Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, Japan and China, as well as Florida fish farms and San Diego fish farms, Central American. They all have these geopolitical ties, and some of them are really interesting. Sometimes even pet fish are funding war, and that's kind of a crazy thought that these little like dollar fish or 50-cent fish or 10-cent fish are tied into an economy in a roundabout way that can have such an impact on people's lives and on the world economy and the world geopolitical system. So thanks for staying tuned. I'm going to try to get a little better production value going on here soon. If people like this, if you dig it, comment, like, subscribe, and I will catch you guys next time. Have a great day and take care, guys. All right, bye.